welcome for wonderful songs tonight. It was a joy to have him back leading the singing. Gives me a little bit of a break before I get up and preach. So thank you for doing that tonight for us. Well, Mark chapter number 5. We'll continue our study in this book, in this chapter. And last week we looked at the first part of chapter 5, went through 20 verses, and we looked at the maniac of Gadara, or the demon-possessed man, however you'd like to say it. The Bible describes him as being one possessed with devils, and how Jesus stepped out of the boat, and there he was to greet him. And what a greeting right after the big storm. So Jesus has been kind of busy, and as we've read through these chapters and studied this, and as we got into it last week and looked at it, and how Jesus didn't run off from him. He wasn't afraid of him. He stood his ground because Jesus is in control of them. He's over them. They're nothing but fallen angels. They were created by God, so they don't have any power over God. And Jesus stood his ground, cast those demons out of the man, put them into the swine. They ran off into the sea there and drowned, and so much for the swine. And then Jesus then focused on the man that was possessed. And what an encouragement that was to read that you think sometimes some people are just too far gone. You ever meet somebody and you're like, man, I just don't know if they could ever get saved. We do that. Our minds go there. And if you don't, then you're just going to polish your halo. But our minds will go there. We're like, man, I just don't know if that person can get saved. But through the power of the blood of Jesus Christ, anybody can be saved. If they're still alive, they're still breathing, there's still an opportunity. And I honestly believe that. I think sometimes people reject the Holy Spirit and they run away from Him and keep going and keep going. But if they're still breathing, I think there's still an opportunity. And if I'm wrong, I'll just be optimistic, and that's okay with me. But what an encouragement that was to see him. And as we ended that section, he was clothed and in his right mind, sitting at the feet of Jesus, learning from him, wanting to travel back with Jesus, because the Gadarians said, we don't want you here in our coast. Get out of here. You've caused this problem. You've hurt our economy by causing over 2,000 swine to be drowned. And so they were quite upset about that. They weren't happy that the demon-possessed man was better. They were upset because they lost some money, and that's a bad attitude to have too. And so Jesus was leaving, and the man here, he wanted to go with him. And Jesus told him in verse 19, he said, go home to thy friends and tell them how great things the Lord hath done for thee, and hath compassion on thee. And the man departed in verse 20 and began to publish in Decapolis how great things Jesus had done for him. And all men did marvel at what Jesus did for this man here by the Sea of Galilee. And what an amazing story to read. And we can see the power of Jesus, how He has it over demons and they don't have any hold with Him. And an encouragement to us, and we learn more about Christ. And we'll learn more about that impact later on as we study the book of Mark. So we get into verse 21, and now we begin to see Jairus' daughter. Jairus' daughter here in chapter 5, verse 21. All the way really down to the end of the chapter, there is a break in here in verse 25 down through verse 34, where this certain lady which hath an issue of blood 12 years comes into the picture. But for tonight, we're going to skip over that and stay focused on Jairus' daughter and the event that takes place here as Jesus gets back across the Sea of Galilee. So he has gone from one side to the other and then back to the other again in a short amount of time. What an amazing thing to read and to see that as Jesus is moving along. We see He doesn't stay where He wasn't wanted. If you want Him to leave, He's going to leave. He's not going to force Himself on you. If you don't want God in your life, He's not going to be in your life. And then you're going to face the consequences for that. And then don't come to church and complain because God's left you when you left Him. I'll get off that soapbox. But as we see here, Jesus is going back on the other side. Verse 21 is where we start off, and we see Jesus' return back across the Sea of Galilee. It says in verse 21, and when Jesus was passed over again by ship onto the other side, much people gathered unto Him, and He was nigh unto the sea. So here He is coming back across the Sea of Galilee. He's in the ship, and as he gets back across, there's a whole crowd of people waiting on him. I wonder if they even left the Sea of Galilee as he went across, or if they heard he was coming back, because we have to remember and get our minds wrapped around this wasn't in the 21st century, okay? There wasn't texting, there wasn't CB radios, if we want to go back a little further. You know, I don't even know if they had Morse code and were flashing signals across with light. But I'm not sure how they knew Jesus was coming back across the Sea of Galilee, but somehow they knew he was, and they were gathered there at the sea waiting on him. So as he came, he traveled back across, and then this large crowd of people gathered waiting on him, wanting to see what he was going to do next. It's a big difference from the greeting he got on the other side, because there was nothing but a demon-possessed man waiting for him there. And so we get into verse 22 down through verse 24. We find out that Jesus is specifically sought after. Jesus is sought after by somebody. Now, of course, this whole crowd of people are there. Some of them may be there just to see what Jesus does next because they like seeing the magic tricks, or whatever term they want to use. Some of them are probably there because they want to be healed. They have something going on. And maybe some of them genuinely want to learn more from Christ. They realize He's the Messiah. We want to follow after Him. We're waiting to learn more from Him. And they generally are there for that purpose. We don't know. We just know it's a large crowd. But as we get into it in verse 22, there's a certain person that stands out in the Scriptures here. Verse 22 says, "And behold, there cometh one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet." So first off, we find that Jairus finds Jesus. He goes through this crowd of people. We don't know how large it is. I would imagine it's bigger than the crowd we have here tonight. That'd just be my imagination speaking. But you can imagine him trying to weave through this crowd of people to get to Jesus. He has a goal, a purpose. And it's interesting that the Bible gives us the title of who he is. They could have just said a certain man, or Jairus went to meet Jesus or sought for him. But it tells us here that he was one of the rulers of the synagogue. Now, I went and did some studying and looking up that, and did some digging around in that about what the ruler of the synagogue is. And as I was reading it, it carries the idea of being the president or somebody who's in charge of the synagogue. Part of the duties would be the upkeep and operation of the building, the synagogue itself, and then also the order and sanctity of the services that took place there, along with picking out scrolls and passages that they would read during the Sabbath and all those. So in essence, in a thought, we might label him as maybe a pastor or the leader of the synagogue at that time. That was the information that I had gathered when I was studying about it. And so we see he has a predominant place in the synagogue. Now, if you remember back in chapter number 1, when Jesus was come into Capernaum in verse 21, on this it says, "And straightway on the Sabbath day he entered into the synagogue and taught." And I was wondering if maybe Jairus was the one that was there. When Jesus entered in, he would have been the one that gave permission or allowed Jesus to get up and speak. And was in the synagogue all those times we've been reading through here, going through the book, and we've seen where Jesus was at the synagogue on this day and this happened. Remember the man with the withered hand? We studied that a while back. That happened in the synagogue. Possibly Jairus was there watching this take place. Jairus knew who Jesus was. He knew what Jesus had done. Jesus had healed people. He had cast out demons. All these things had been taking place. Either he saw it or he knew about it. He knew what was going on, being in this predominant status, this position that he held in the synagogue. And so we find him here. He comes and he finds Jesus and he falls at his feet. He doesn't go to Jesus and say, and stands there and is boastful and proud and claiming who I am and I'm the ruler of the synagogue and I need you to come with me. No, he falls at the feet of Jesus. He realizes who Jesus is. He understands that Jesus is the Messiah. He's seen Jesus heal people multiple times and all these things take place. And then in verse 23, verse 22, the end of it, we see where he worships Jesus as he falls at his feet. And then we get into verse 23 down through verse 24. And I labeled this as Jairus' heavy request. Now, I kind of used an older term there, but also the thought of the weight of this request that's on Jairus' heart and mind as he comes to Jesus. Look in verse 23. It says, "And besought him greatly, saying, My little daughter lieth on the point of death. I pray thee, come and lay thy hands on her, that she may be healed, and she shall live." Wow, what a statement. What a weight to weigh on you. Now, I could probably tell you 15 years ago, 13 years ago, this passage wouldn't have much weight to me. Being a young man, not having any kids, but after having kids, that passage has a lot of weight. That I can understand where Jairus is coming from. Because if I was in that position, you better believe I'd be spending some time on my knees praying, asking the Lord to heal my kids. I guarantee you that's where I would be at. Here I can sympathize with Jairus' predicament, where he's at, that heavy weight that's weighing on his shoulder, and many of you can as well. You can understand that weight that's coming down on him. Even in some instances where your kids have had issues, when Brianna had her appendix taken out and all that going on, that was a little bit heavy on us. You try to understand and let God handle it, but it's still a weight. You're still concerned about it. You still spend time praying and asking the Lord to take care of her and to look after her and all those things. And so we see as Jairus is kneeling, laying down at Jesus' feet, he besat him greatly. He was begging Jesus, praying him, please come touch my daughter, that she will be healed. Look at the wording here. He says, come and lay hands on her, that she may be healed, and she shall live. He knew that Jesus could heal her because he had seen it happen time and time again as he had ministered there in Capernaum and in that region. We go back to when he healed Simon Peter's mother-in-law, and then the whole town came and visited. Remember the end of chapter 1? And they all came to the house. Here, that poor lady, she just got healed from a fever, and she's trying to minister people, and then the whole town shows up. It's kind of, I imagine some of you ladies wouldn't be too happy about that event taking place. But here she is, and probably Jairus was one of them that showed up to see what was going on. He knew what Jesus could do to that point. He knew Jesus could heal her and make her whole and make her well again, and she would live. In verse 24, we see that heavy request, and as we continue looking at it, it says, look at Jesus' response to this request that Jairus had. And it says, and Jesus went with him, and much people followed him and thronged him. They were surrounding him. I can imagine Jesus walking through the town. And here he is walking through, and all the people, oh, Jesus is back, Jesus is back. And they're coming out from all over trying to get near him, to the point that they're surrounding him, they're smothering him to where he's having issues walking through the town. And they're following along with him. And then we come into verse 25 down through verse 34, and we'll look at that next week, Lord willing, about the lady with the issue of blood, and we'll go into that story. But as they're going through the town, all this is taking place. Now let's move down to verse 35 and see what happens after the event there in town. And while Jesus is speaking to this lady, it says in verse 35, there came from the ruler of the synagogue's house certain which said, thy daughter is dead, why troublest thou the master any further? Jairus receives what we would label as bad news, wouldn't we? That's where our mind would go. This is bad news. This is sad news. It's not something we're happy about. No doubt Jairus was devastated. And I would imagine, because he's a human and he has a sin nature, and we all have these mindset, if I was in this boat, I probably would have said, Jesus, if you had just waited on this woman and got to my house, she would have been fine. My daughter would have lived. The Bible doesn't say that, okay? Okay, so don't go saying, Brother Robbie said the Bible said that. I'm paraphrasing them. That's Robbieology, okay? So it can be thrown away. You can throw that out if you don't like it. It's fine. But I'm just saying he's human just as much as we are. That's right. And that thought process could have went through his mind. And all these things and the sadness that would have hit him at that point as he's thinking of his daughter died. And Jesus didn't get there in time. And if he had just got back quicker, maybe if he hadn't left, All those things would have been going through his mind as he receives this bad news. And this man that comes to him and says, "Why troublest thou the master any farther?" Well, don't bother with it. It's too late. She's dead. They didn't understand the full power that Jesus had. And we wouldn't either. You know, we say, "Oh, but Jesus can raise people from the dead." How do we know that? Because we've read the Bible. Because we read of those events taking place. They didn't see that yet. They haven't seen that happen. They don't know that that's even possible. In their minds, it's not a possibility, just the same as it would be in ours. We don't go to the funeral home and expect the person in the casket to rise up and start walking, because many of us would not be in the funeral home anymore if that took place. I'll just say that much. And so we have here Jairus in a bad state. He's in a sad position. This news has come, no doubt, at a time when he was already in mourning and sorrowful for her being sick and afraid of her death. The physicians, no doubt, that were in town were already there trying to heal her. People were trying to do all these things to try to get her better, and nothing was working. And now we get into this third part where we see Jesus' power over death. Jesus' power over death as we look at this last section of chapter 5. So Jairus receives this bad news. His daughter's dead. And they say, "Don't bother with the master anymore. There's nothing can be done. We'll just make funeral arrangements and move on." In verse 36, look at the assurance that Jesus gives him in verse 36. It says, "As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he saith unto the ruler of the synagogue, Be not afraid, only believe." Wow, what a statement. You might underline, I don't know if you underline right in your Bible, you might underline that. Yeah. Or put a note or whatever you do in passages. Be not afraid, only believe. How many times have we been in situations in our own life where we needed that statement, right? Be not afraid, only believe. When we were traveling around, there's a few little instances, where things happened as we traveled, and you just had to trust God. I'm sure I've told you one when we were traveling back from Montana, and we were just north of Nashville, and we pulled off an exit to eat lunch, and I heard this awful grinding noise, and I knew it was a transmission. And we pulled in, and I got out and checked it, and I was like, "Yep, it's the transmission." And I told Amanda, I said, "Let's go eat lunch." It was lunchtime. We were pulling off to eat lunch. I said, "Might as well go eat lunch. There's nothing I can do about it. I can't fix it in Cracker Barrel parking lot." They have a lot in that store, but they don't have transmissions in there. And we ate, and we had a meeting to be at that night. And it was about 2 or 3 hours away from where we were at. And I had the choice of whether or not I was going to cancel the meeting and come try to make it back here. And I called my mechanic buddy who works on transmissions, and we talked through, and he said, "See how far you can make it. If it's still moving, keep rolling." And so I got back in, and we started heading down the interstate, and I was moving along, and it was pulling, and I got to a crossroads, and I had to make a choice, either go to the meeting, a literal crossroads. It was either go to the meeting or go home. And I asked the Lord, I said, "Which way do I go?" And he said, "Go to the meeting." And I was like, "Okay, transmission's about to go, but you're in charge." So we went to the meeting and ended up pulling and got back home fine. And the next day I took the Suburban over to the mechanic shop and left it. And about 2 days later he calls me back, and he asked me again. He said, "You were pulling a camper, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he asked where I had been, and he said, "There is no way you should have made it home." He said, "This transmission is completely gone." I said, "Well, I know how I made it home, but I can't explain it to you." I know Jesus held the transmission together and made it work. And so there's instances where we can't be afraid. We only believe. There's a time when we were leaving Fiji, and I've told some of you this, and I won't share too much of it because we're online, but there was instances where we were standing in the airport, and there was absolutely nothing I could do. Don't be afraid, just believe that God's in control. That's a hard thing to do. We've all been there before. It's hard to say, "Lord, I'm going to trust you through this situation, even though I have no idea how this is going to end." I don't know how this is going to play out, but I do know that you're in charge, and I know you can handle it. And that's what Jesus is telling Jairus here. Be not afraid, only believe. Believe that I can do this. Believe in God. Believe in me, and you're going to be okay. What a statement that he gave Jairus, and something we can apply to our lives today and hold on to close. Through those difficult times, those things we don't understand, the assurance that was given. And then look at verse number 37 down through verse 38. There's a command that Jesus gives us. Interesting as Jesus enters into this scenario, into this situation, and he begins to take control over it in a more direct way, in a more precise way. We've seen up to this point a whole crowd of people that were around him as he's going through the town. They're throning him, they're surrounding him. This man comes forward and says, your daughter's dead, and all these people are here. And Jesus gives a command here in verse 37 down through first part of verse 38. He says, and he suffered no man to follow him, save Peter, James, and John, the brother of Jesus, and he cometh to the house of the ruler of the synagogue. He came up, and only Peter, James, and John, who tend to be kind of some people might classify them as the inner circle with Jesus and that sort of thing. And sometimes as we read through the Gospels, you kind of see the disciples kind of set up in groups or categories a little bit and that sort of thing. But at this point, Jesus chose Peter, James, and John to follow after him, and only them. The rest of them were to stay back. In verse 38, as we continue on, we see some questions that get asked as Jesus gets in. But let's look at the scene as Jesus arrives at the house. Jesus arrives at the house, and it says, and seeth the torment, and them that wept and wailed greatly. What a sad scene to walk up to. All these people that were there, they're crying. This young lady had passed away. She was dead. And they're crying over her. They're sad. No doubt some of them are probably mad in some manner. Just as we all experience it when someone passes away. All the emotions that are involved with that. And the hardship that's there. And then verse 39 says, and when he was come in, Jesus came in, he saith unto them, why make you this ado and weep? The damsel is not dead, but sleepeth. Wow. I'm just be honest with you, I don't think I would ever say that if I walked into that situation. Of course, I couldn't say that, but the thought of that statement as Jesus walks in, why are you weeping? What's all the fuss about? She's just asleep. And look at the response, that question that was asked them. Why are you so upset? She's just asleep. She's resting. But look at verse 40. And we see here the disbelief of some of them. And they laughed him to scorn. Wow. They laughed at Jesus to scorn. To the point they were mocking him. They didn't believe. They had no belief that Jesus could handle it. They'd seen him heal people. They'd seen him cast out demons. They'd seen him bring a withered hand and made it whole. But there's no way he can bring somebody back from the dead, because once you're dead, you're dead. There's no coming back from that. There's no way that she can come back from the dead. And even Jesus said the damsel is not dead, but sleepeth. Now it kind of gets a little controversial there. Was she really dead? Or was she really asleep? Which one is it? We're not going to get into that discussion, because that might take a while to see where we end up, and we might end up splitting the church over it. So we're not going to go into it. But it's still a miracle nevertheless, whatever happens. That's the focus. We don't want to get nitpicky about it and get upset and mad at each other over a little detail. We want to focus on Jesus. We want to focus on what he did. Look at the power that he has here with Jairus' daughter. And they laughed him to scorn there in verse 40, the first part. And then notice the audience that Jesus allows to see what happens. Watch here in the middle of verse 40, and then we go down into a little bit into verse 41. But in verse 40 he says, but when he had put them all out, Jesus shoot them out. If you're not going to believe, if you're going to laugh, you're going to leave. You're not going to have a part of it. You're not going to get to see. You don't want to believe that I'm not going to work a miracle in front of you. I wonder sometimes, if you go back up to verse 36, but it says, be not afraid, only believe. How many times God doesn't work things out because we don't put our faith and trust in Him? We don't believe Him like we should. We want to take it into our own hands. We want to say, there's no way God can work this out. It can't happen. We want to be in control. And that's our human nature gets that. We want to be in control of every situation. We try to manipulate things and move things around so that it goes the way we want it to go. And we try to make it happen like that. And God's not going to work in those situations. He's not a part of it. We're not believing. We're not trusting in Jesus to take care of the situation, whatever it might be. But Jesus says, He puts them all out. All those who won't believe, they're laughing Him to scorn, and Jesus shoos them out of the house. All right, you need to get out. So they leave, and the only one that's left, the only ones that are left, is He taketh the father and the mother of the damsel, and them that were with Him, which would be Peter, James, and John, and entered in where the damsel was laying. That's the audience. It was the mom and dad, and Peter, James, and John, and Jesus. They go into this young lady's, where she's laying down at, as she lays there, and He looks down at her in verse number 41. Now look at the miracle that they get to see. Verse 41 down through verse 42 tells us, and He took the damsel by the hand and said unto her, Talitha cumi, which is being interpreted, damsel, I say unto thee, arise. Wow. Can you imagine sitting there looking down at that, and Jesus tells her to, damsel, arise. I say unto thee, arise. And then straightway the damsel arose and awaked, for she was of the age of 12 years old, and they were all astonished with a great astonishment. Wow, what a sight. What a thought to think that here Jesus comes in, she's laying there, she's gone, there's no hope, it's all over with, but yet Jesus is in control, and He raises her up. And she sits up, and they're all amazed at this. They don't understand it. How could you? We wouldn't understand it if it happened today. It would just boggle our minds to think as Jesus comes in and heals this young lady and raises her from the dead, and here she is sitting up. And as she's there, He gives a command in verse 43. And it says, and He charged them straightly that no man should know it, and commanded that something should be given her to eat. He told him to keep it quiet. I couldn't do that. We get excited, don't we? Isn't it an exciting thing when God does something in our lives and we want to share it? You'll never guess what God did in my life. I don't know, sometimes we like to pick on different denominations and stuff, but sometimes Baptists, we get a little quiet. We don't get very excited. We're not very thrilled, oh, Jesus did this in my life, and we're kind of quiet about it. There's nothing wrong with getting excited about it, so you never believe what Jesus did this week. We want to share those things. We want to be excitement. I try to share them with different people. I'll talk to Brother Billy or Brother Lily or Byron or Roger sometimes, and we share things that go on. Wow, guess what God did this week? And how the Lord worked in this situation and how this happened. And we look at all these things, and sometimes they come from what is presumably a bad situation. When we go back to verse 35, where this man comes to the ruler, to Jairus, and says, your daughter is dead, that's a bad situation. How many times do we get in those, and then we get to see God work through them? Brother Billy and I were talking about something today, and I was telling him, I was like, hey, you know what that means? It was kind of some rough news, and we're trying to figure it out and whatever. And I told Billy, I said, you know what that means? It means we're doing something. It means something's going on. I'm excited about it. It doesn't bother me. Let's just keep moving. Let's keep moving forward. Let's keep looking at Jesus. Let's keep trusting in Him that He's going to take care of the situation and He's in charge of it. And we're going to believe in Him and trust that He'll take care of it no matter what the outcome is, because it's His plan. He had a reason. He had a purpose for all of this taking place. And what an amazing thought to see. And as we read through this, we can look at this and say, you know what? Jesus did that here. He can do it in my life too. Amen. He can do it in your life. He can do it in the church. He can take care of those situations that we don't understand what's taking place. we don't get it. We just have to, don't be afraid, only believe. Keep trusting in Jesus in everything that goes on in our life. What an amazing thing that happened here. Now I would suggest, verse 43 where Jesus commands them to be quiet and not to say anything, that's specific for her. We'll take a little application and say, let's share with other people. Let's say, some things you might want to keep quiet, but a lot of them we can go around and say, you know what God did in my life this week? It was so neat how God worked this out and how this happened and how He changed this situation and how I thought, I was in this situation and it was looking bad, but God changed it and He made it better. And now all this is taking place. And what an amazing event that we can see this and apply it to our own lives and say, you know what? God's still in control. We don't need to be afraid of what goes on. You watch the news and it's bad news most of the time. You don't even want to watch it anymore or read a newspaper or read news online, whatever way you do it. We don't want to because it seems like it's bad news, but guess what? God's still in control. He still knows what's going on. We look at those things. We think sometimes as we do the project in the church, I can't tell you how many times we've gotten phone calls. Brother Billy's called me and said, guess what? And I'm like, now what? It's happened over and over. It happened this past week. He called me. He said, guess what? And I said, I don't want to know. Thankfully, it was just a little thing. It wasn't anything major. But you think about it and you're like, oh, not another one. But it works and it keeps moving. And we keep trusting the Lord to work through the situations and keep trusting in Him as He did here with Jairus' daughter. And we can apply that to our own lives, look at it and say, you know what? I'm just going to keep trusting my Lord. I'm going to keep moving forward. I'm going to keep following after Him. And I'm going to tell other people about it. A lot of them did. We see a lot of the people that are healed as we go through the book of Mark. And Jesus tells them, don't say anything. And they turn around and tell everybody. And yeah, God does something great in our life, and then we keep it quiet because we don't want to tell anybody. We're bashful, we're shy, whatever it might be. But we need to get excited about what God does in our life. We need to be telling others and encouraging, because it isn't an encouraging thing when someone comes and says, you know what God did in my life this week? You know how He worked through this situation? Or maybe you have a prayer partner that you're talking with and sharing things and saying, hey, will you pray specifically with me about this situation? And maybe it's just between you and them. And then you get to tell them, guess what God did? And how God worked out that situation. That's exciting. Amen. That's wonderful to see. And we grow in our faith and our trust in God, because each time we do it, each time that happens, we can grow more. And we can move forward more. And we say, hey, you know what? God did this over here. He can handle this one over here. I always remember that. I've looked back over the years and thought about when I was younger, the different things that would seem difficult to me. Maybe when I was in Bible college, there would be so many. That was the first time I was out on my own. My parents abandoned me. They kicked me out of the house. No, they didn't. They did kick me out of the house because I came home one weekend after college and Dad turned my room into his office. So I took the hint and just never went back home. So I was in those situations, and there was times would come up and money would be short, and I would look at it and go, oh, I don't know how I'm going to survive this. And it would just be this huge dramatic thing in my mind because I didn't know how God was going to take care of it. But He always did. And then next thing it would be a little bigger and a little bigger and a little bigger. And now I look back at college and go, oh, that was so easy. But it wasn't back then, because we grow and it becomes easier and easier. And just as we read tonight and we look at that, don't be afraid, only believe. Keep trusting the Lord. He's going to take us through each one of these situations. And when we trust Him, it becomes easier and easier. Even though the situation seemed difficult, we say, you know what? God took care of me here. He's going to take care of me there. He's in control of it. We can trust Him, put our faith and trust in Him. What an amazing story to read tonight. An event that happened as Jesus took care of Jairus' daughter. And you can imagine this rule of the synagogue, how that impacted his life. I wonder sometimes, I was reading that this week and I was wondering what happened on the next Sabbath day when he went back to the synagogue. Because I can imagine who some of those people were that were there at his house. Probably some of the other scribes and maybe some Pharisees and some of those other men that were always trying to get at Jesus and trying to get Him, and some people there that were part of the Jewish culture that didn't have anything to do with Jesus, and yet here Jairus shows up to the synagogue on Saturday with his daughter, who they thought was dead. You imagine that conversation, the thoughts that were going through those minds. But Jesus works in mysterious ways, doesn't He? In wonderful ways that we can't imagine. And it's such a blessing to be able to read that in the Bible and think, God's got it. I don't have to worry about it. I just got to trust Him. Just keep believing, keep trusting in Him. Amen? Well, let's pray and then we'll close up. Dear Lord, thank You for tonight. Thank You for this passage. And what a wonderful event that we can read and see the power that You have over everything in this world, and we don't have to worry. And as You told Jairus, don't be afraid, only believe. And we ask, Lord, that You would help us to grow closer to You. Help us to put our faith and trust in You each and every day, that we can become closer and become better Christians and closer to You. And we ask these things in Your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Brother Robbie.